Use me for my labor, money, and time? Sure, but good luck ever adopting a kid. My sister Sia is married, and she has 2 kids, 1 boy and 1 girl. My niece and nephew are great kids and they don't cause much trouble. They have the typical sibling fights, but nothing too serious. I love them a lot. For about 2 years, I actually lived with my sister. It was a really tough time that had a big impact on our relationship. She saw me as someone she could use for free labor, money, and babysitting. Even when I managed to find a part-time job, she insisted I give her almost half of my pay or leave. It was a nightmare because she took advantage of me completely. As soon as I could, I moved out. We only have limited contact during family gatherings. After I moved out, Sia started complaining about how she has no help with the kids and never gets a break anyway. She started talking about wanting to foster a teenager. She wants to adopt a teenager so they can help her take care of her kids. Here's her reasoning. I want a kid who's around 16 or 17, someone who may have been in the foster system for a while. They can share a room with my son or sleep in the garage. They can help me with housework, chores, cooking, and even assist with my cookie business since I bake and sell cookies. They can also babysit the kids so my husband Bob and I can have some alone time or go out occasionally. They'll be grateful to have a home and won't complain. I won't even have to pay them. And when they turn 18, I can just sign up for another foster kid. Teenagers will be so much easier than younger kids since they'll be grateful just to have a place to live, food, siblings if they've been separated from their real ones, and clothes. I was shocked and knew I had to do something. Go to part 2. Use me for my labor, money, and time? Sure, but good luck ever adopting a kid. Part 2 halves. I was shocked and horrified by my sister's plan to adopt a teenager and then exclusively use them as labor to babysit her children and do chores for her family. I told her it was a terrible idea, but no matter what I said, she didn't listen. She went ahead with it anyway. Knowing how big of a disaster this could be, I offered to be a reference for her, saying that I would be a better reference than our mom because I lived in her household and could talk about how she's a great cook, treats her husband well, and is overall an okay human being. Which is all true, I guess. It's just that when the social worker came to my apartment to ask me questions about my sister, I had a little more to say. I immediately told the social worker the real reason behind my sister wanting to foster a kid and how she treated me when I lived with her, including all the times when she blatantly used me for money and labor. I even had text receipts to demonstrate the way she treated me. The lady thanked me for being honest. Then, my sister called me crying, saying that she wouldn't be considered for any adoptions or foster placements. The social worker had told her that they didn't think her home was suitable. She asked if I had said anything, and I told her the truth. She got really mad at me, hung up, and we haven't spoken since. She has sent me some angry texts. A few family members are on her side. They seem to think that foster kids are like dogs or something, and that they would be so happy just to have a roof over their heads and would gladly do all the housework. But am I really the one who's wrong in this situation? My daughter is harassing my wife, so I've decided to stop paying her tuition. Ida, my wife died in a car accident when she was only 35 years old. I was really sad for about a year after she passed away. Then, around March, I met my new girlfriend Paula, who is 43 years old. Paula was the first person who made me laugh after my wife's death. She's super smart, has a dark sense of humor that I really enjoy, and she's an amazing cook. Overall, I can see myself spending the rest of my life with her. It's important to note that Paula is on the heavier side, which is relevant to what happened later. I have 2 kids, my son Ethan and my daughter Sophia. They knew I had a new girlfriend even before I introduced them this summer. When they first met, Paula instantly got along with Ethan, but my daughter Sophia was really distant and didn't warm up to her. After that, I asked them both separately if something was wrong, but they both denied there being any issues, except for Paula, who said that she was going to try her best to build a relationship. Well, Paula tried a few more times to connect with Sophia, but Sophia rudely rejected her every time. Both my kids came home for Christmas. At one meal, before we started eating, I reminded Sophia to be polite since she had always been rude to Paula, even though Paula had been nothing but kind to her. The dinner started off okay for the first 15 minutes, but things were very tense. Paula kept starting conversations, but Ethan couldn't really talk too much because he had a slight sore throat. The burden of conversation fell to Sophia, which I guess finally got to be too much for her because when Paula was talking about how good the food was and was about to get more bread, Sophia said, "Don't you think you've eaten enough, you fat pig?" Go to part 2. My daughter is harassing my wife, so I've decided to stop paying her tuition. Ida, part 2 halves. After Sophia told my wife Paula that she was a fat pig, my wife began crying and immediately left for the bedroom. She didn't even cause a scene. She just politely and respectfully left. That's the opposite of what Sophia did, though. I was so angry that I told Sophia to get out of my house and leave immediately. This wasn't very effective, though, because finding a hotel in the Christmas rush would have been genuinely impossible with her allowance, and her dorm was across the country. She has no friends, either. She took my car, drove around for half an hour, and came back with some food from Burger King. Before she came back to my house, I sent her a text message saying that I wouldn't pay her tuition anymore unless she did 2 things. 1. Apologize to my wife, and 2. Be sincere enough where my wife would accept her apology. Sophia must have thought I was bluffing because instead of apologizing, she continued to be rude during the rest of her Christmas stay. Paula stopped coming down for family meals, and Ethan began going upstairs to hang out with her. At one point, I asked Ethan what to do because he was the other most neutral party in this situation, and he said that nothing I did was ever going to make Sophia apologize because she doesn't just hate Paula, she hates Paula for replacing their mom. Given that he said this after Sophia had been even more obnoxious for a week, I logged into the website where her university takes tuition payments, cancelled her tuition for next semester, and sent her screenshots to show what I did. Within an hour, she ran upstairs to me crying and begging me to change my mind, but I told her I had made up my decision. She even offered to finally apologize to Paula, but this apology only has ulterior motives and I think Paula deserves more than that, but Sophia is still just a kid. Should I give her another chance? Make me get a pixie cut against my will at 15? You can deal with your cancer alone. I'm 30 years old, and my mom recently got diagnosed with cancer. Due to the chemotherapy treatments, she lost almost all of her hair. That's been really tough for her because she believes that having hair makes you look pretty, just like my grandmother and all the men in our family think. She asked me if I could cut my long hair short to make a wig for her. Technically, I could do it since my hair is extremely long, but honestly, I don't want to. When I was younger, my mom made me keep my hair super short, like a literal buzz cut from the time when I was 15 until 18. I absolutely hated it, and she only compromised and let me have a pixie cut when I turned 18, and if she ever felt like it was getting too long, she would cut it for me. During that time, I got teased a lot, and it made me feel really insecure. I struggled with feeling pretty and having self-confidence, because, again, everyone in our family thought that long hair was critical to being beautiful. But as my hair grew out, things started to get better. Because of my upbringing, I understand exactly what my mom is going through and just how terrible it must feel, but I don't want to give up the hair I've spent so many years growing. And to be honest, without sounding too vain, I felt really ugly from when I was born until when I moved out and finally grew it out, and I don't want to ever let myself feel that way again. There's even a small, vindictive part of me that thinks this is justice for what she did to me, as she's finally going to understand what I dealt with because of her. I told my mom how I felt, and she wasn't mad, but she seemed really upset and disappointed, which somehow feels even worse. But should I be the bigger person here? She doesn't have anyone else to support her, and I can't because my job is too demanding. This is the one way I could help her, and she is my mom. But she also made my life hell for a really long time. What do you think? Part 1. Man was found not guilty for violating, torturing and killing two sisters and their mom. On May 20, 1998, in Donglu village in China's Shandong province, there was a house inhabited by the Wang family. The men of the family had left the village to work in the cities, leaving behind two sisters, 33-year-old Wang Ernie and 20-year-old Wang Xuan, and their 60-year-old mother Gao Jinfeng. A fellow villager walked by the house and thought it was odd that the family hadn't awoken. So he walked up to the house and looked through the windows, and to his horror he discovered two dead bodies. The police arrived and the crime scene was truly horrific. Blood had stained all the walls and there were two naked bodies found in the house belonging to Wang Ernie and Wang Xuan, with their bodies identified by their fellow villagers. Wang Xuan had been killed by a single blunt wound to the back of the skull. Wang Ernie had suffered a much worse fate. Her hands were tied behind her back with an electric wire. The killer had bludgeoned her face and leaving identification difficult. An autopsy showed that she had been raped and sperm samples were recovered. The police searched the entire house but only found the bodies of the two sisters. As mentioned, their brothers were away working in the cities, but their mother Gao Jinfeng, according to the villagers, she never left. This presented a problem since when the police investigated every little corner of the home, she was nowhere to be found. Although her body hadn't been located, the police did not have high hopes that Gao was still alive. The police conducted an extensive search effort to try and locate Gao's body. The police found a small makeshift cottage outside the village and the police entered the building. When inside, the police found one room in particular was locked and a trail of blood led from the cottage to the door. The police now had the faintest of hopes that Gao was still alive and being kept prisoner inside that cottage. This hope didn't last long, as after the police broke down the cottage door they were treated to another horrific crime scene. Gao was lying on the floor in a pool of blood and blood splattered against the walls. She had been repeatedly hit on the head with a blunt instrument. Unlike her two daughters, Gao was fully clothed. An autopsy conducted on all three placed their time of death at 8 o'clock to 10 p.m. on May 19. After Wang Ernie and Wang Xuan were murdered, the killer brought Gao to the cottage where he killed her away from the others. While investigating, the police found 3 partial and bloody footprints, and comparisons proved that they did not belong to any of the victims. The killer had purposefully disrupted and ruined the pattern of the footprints, severely degrading any evidentiary value. The police could not use this footprint to determine any information about the killer, such as height. Meanwhile, various tools could be considered the murder weapon, including hose, irons, floor tiles and other blunt objects. The murderer had wiped down most of the weapons and thus only one partial index fingerprint was found. The weapon the fingerprint was found on was the iron, so the police ruled on that being the murder weapon. The only biological trace of the killer was a sperm spot found on Wang Ernie's foot, but in 1998 China's DNA technology wasn't advanced enough to test it. The case became the most known and talked about in the region, and based on the brutality and tampering with the crime scene, many feared the killer would strike again. Due to this, the Shandong Provincial Police issued the local police with a deadline ordering them to solve the case in a certain amount of time or else they'd face consequences. With no leads to speak of and in order to solve the case or else, a wrongful arrest was practically destined to happen. The police spent hours going through the crime scene to try and find any details they may have missed. The bedrooms looked completely turned over as if the killer was looking for something. So in spite of the excessive brutality shown by the killer, the motive shifted to possible robbery. The police re-investigated the cottage and found something in the corner of the room that they had initially missed. The police found a pile of ashes with some burnt pieces of paper inside the ashes. The papers belonged to the family's accounting book, which held 50,000 yuan in deposits. This perplexed the police since they couldn't figure out why the killer would steal their accounting book just to burn it rather than steal the substantial amount of money that was on it. The police then remembered that Wang Ernie was killed especially brutally, with her face left largely unidentifiable. She was also the only victim to be raped. The police then decided to go with the theory that Wang Ernie was the main target and that she had been the victim of a crime of passion. On May 21, the police utilized sniffer dogs to see if they could track the victim's scent, and they were led to a man named the dilapidated house of a man named Yu Sankan. The police, Part 1, man was found not guilty for violating, torturing and killing two sisters and their mom. On May 20, 1998, in Donglu village in China's Shandong province, there was a house inhabited by the Wang family. The men of the family had left the village to work in the cities, leaving behind two sisters. Part 2, man was found not guilty for violating, torturing and killing two sisters and their mom. The police noted several samples of writing on the walls of Yu's home, with some being written in a frantic and unintelligible manner. What was legible to the police, however, was very damning. Yu had written various writings such: "I love you Wang Ernie I hate you, die I'll live ah." The police tested the blood on the pair of pants found in Yu's room, and they were the same blood type belonging to Wang Ernie. Nonetheless, he remained the police's main suspect, and a massive manhunt was launched to find him. As it was 1998 and China, surveillance cameras were rare, and the police, in order to find Yu, had to rely on distributing pictures of his face and simply asking locals in neighboring villages and towns if they had seen him. Little did they know that finding Yu would be easier than they could have ever anticipated. On May 22, Yu simply walked back into Donglu village, and when his fellow villagers saw him, he was swiftly reported to the police and arrested. At the police station, Yu appeared to be in a trance state and was very haggard, seemingly not having slept in a while. The police barely even interrogated Yu. Almost as soon as they opened their mouth, Yu was quick to confess to the 3 murders, and his description of the crime scene appeared to match the forensic evidence and the police's own version of events. So it came as a shock to everyone, even Yu himself, when the deputy police director of the county police, Liu Weidong, ordered Yu to be released and told everyone that he was not the murderer. So with how ironclad the case against him was, what evidence could there have been proving his innocence? The first discrepancy was that in his confession Yu claimed to have strangled them to death. This was simply not accurate. As already established, all 3 were killed via blunt force trauma with no strangulation or ligature marks left on their necks. And although the fingerprint found on the murder weapon was only partial, enough of it was still preserved to compare it to Yu's fingerprint. The results came back not a match. During a third interrogation, Yu broke down into tears and retracted his confession. He claimed that he went to their home to see Wang Ernie only to discover their bodies. He rushed into the house and got very to her body, which is where the blood came from. Yu then ran home and changed his pants before escaping, with Yu fearing that the police would suspect him. He only returned home to the village to eat and sleep, as his escape was unplanned and he brought no food, clothes or supplies with him. As for why he confessed, Yu said that because Wang Ernie, who he claimed to love, was dead, his family was destitute, and everyone already believed him to be the murderer, he figured he might as well confess, be given a death sentence and be executed, so his family would get some insurance and compensation to live off of. Even this confession had its flaws. Due to evidence showing he may have been innocent, the police continued to investigate and discovered that Yu had an alibi, as many villagers attested to Yu eating bowls of noodles at their homes when the crime took place. The police searched Yu's house again and found some letters written by him which still showed that even if he didn't kill her, he was still very much obsessed with Wang Ernie. The letters included phrases such as "I do not want to die, I cannot help it, goodbye, my dear Wang Ernie, and both Wu Zhongwei and I have been cheated by you." This was the first time the name Wu Zhongwei had ever come up, so the police relentlessly questioned Yu about him. Although reluctant to speak of him, according to Yu, Wu was the man who became Wang Ernie's boyfriend after a prior relationship between her and Wu had deteriorated. Although he had no reason to suspect this, Yu believed that Wang Ernie had cheated on him and was cheating on Wu as well, so when he went to try and find Wu to tell him of his suspicions, Wu appeared to simply take Yu's word for it and was furious and almost immediately began plotting retaliation. The police asked where Wu was from, and Wu told them that his address was in Zhocheng and he worked at a local coal mine. Since he wasn't home, they rushed to the coal mine, and his employers told the police that Wu had left on May 21 and never returned. Nobody knew where he was, and that was that. Wu remained a fugitive with no trace of his whereabouts ever being discovered. The police, without their main suspect, had to close the case and label it unsolved. In 1998, DNA testing in China was still in its infancy and unable to test the small semen samples found on Wang Ernie's body. By 2011, that was no longer the case. In December 2011, the local police submitted the samples to a DNA testing lab, and after a long wait in February 2012, the results came in. The DNA matched Wu Zhongwei, confirming that he was the killer and solving this case after 14 long years. Unfortunately, Wu's whereabouts were still unknown, but that wasn't the case for much longer. The DNA was tested in Beijing, and the DNA found at the crime scene was a match for a man named Li Hua, who the Beijing police already had in their database. Li was living in Shangshu, located in Henan province, and was arrested for acts of mostly petty theft so often that he was on a first-name basis with the local police, and said local police always knew where he was at any given time. According to them, he was still in Shangshu. When he was arrested on March 15, 2012, He simply said in his own words that he didn't do anything recently, but he soon fell silent when he heard the dialect of the other officers involved in the arrest. He very easily found out where they were from and why they were there. Wu confessed soon afterwards. According to Wu, Yu was lying to make himself appear guilty or responsible again. While Yu made it seem as if Wu was living happily with Wang Ernie until he came along, Wu was actually suspicious that Wang Ernie was cheating on him long before then. Yu simply telling him just made him more suspicious. When he confronted Wang Ernie, she denied everything and Wu was willing to let it go, but even asking her caused their relationship to deteriorate. Wang Ernie gradually ignored him and changed her mind about possibly getting married. Wang Ernie's change of heart apparently to Wu was all the proof he needed to come to the conclusion that Wang Ernie was cheating on him. Based on this alone, Wu prepared to kill her. He broke into the room house where Wang Shuan and Wang Aaron were. He grabbed the iron and hit Wang Aaron with it. When Wang Shuan rushed over, he hit her once and hard enough for her to fall unconscious and later die. He then proceeded to hit Wang Ernie with the iron 2 more times when Gao was awakened by the sounds coming from the room and rushed over. Once Wu saw her, he chased after her all the way to that abandoned cottage where he bludgeoned her to death before locking her in that room and heading back to her home. Once he arrived back, he stripped the 2 bodies naked and tied their wrists behind their back. He then violated Wang Ernie's corpse. After Wu was done, he spent the next few minutes cleaning up the crime scene and washing away as many fingerprints and footprints as he could find. He then made his way to their bedrooms and turned the rooms over until he found the checkbook. He then brought it over to Gao's body, where he lit the book on fire in order to disguise the crime as a robbery gone wrong. Wu was brought over to the now abandoned house where he perfectly reenacted the murder scene in a manner that matched all the psychical and forensic evidence. Wu's trial began later in 2012, where he was found guilty and sentenced to death by the Zhaozhuang City People's Court. According to some sources, this sentence was carried out immediately. My racist roommate keeps interrupting my prayers, so I fought back. I'm Muslim, while my roommate is a Christian. This has caused a fair amount of tension between us, mainly because we're both very devout in our faiths and have a lot of fundamental disagreements with each other's ideology, but I've always done my best to not infringe on my roommate's actual life or college experience. Unfortunately, he has not extended me the same courtesy. For Islam, I have to pray 5 times a day while facing a certain direction. These prayers are pretty unobtrusive and subtle, and I usually try to do them outside the dorm, but there are some days where I'm home all day and have nowhere else to go. However, my roommate hates it when I pray in front of him. He says that if I were to do it once or twice, it would be fine, but that 5 times a day feels excessive and it's like I'm trying to shame him for not being as devout. I told him that my religion is about me, not him, and that I frankly could not care less about how devout he is or isn't, but my roommate just doubled down with the pettiness. He started watching anime whenever I pray without headphones. Or he'll put on comedy specials because he believes it'll get me to stop paying attention to my God. There was even one time where the fire alarm was pulled after I started praying, and although I don't have proof, I'm pretty sure it was him. During a break where I visited my family, I told them about the situation and they were upset on my behalf but advised me to fight back. So, we came up with a plan to hurt my roommate the same way he's been hurting me. He was not ready for what I did when I came back to college. Go to part 2.